Everybody. So good morning to everybody here in person, and good morning to the people out in Zoom land. They're in that camera in the back, so say hi to them. Hi guys. Welcome everybody to the Soil Building Strategies class. So my name is Tia Solvesi. I'm a Florida-friendly extension agent here at the University of Florida, IFAS Extension in Orange County. And I have two co-instructors with me today. I have Christian and I have Mark. And these guys are Master Gardener volunteers, and they also have their own business called Revival Gardening. So we're all soil dorks, nerds. We're Googling microbes at 10 o'clock at night and trying to find out, you know, the best plants to plant in our garden. And so we have a lot of information today. This class is tailored for beginner gardeners. So if you're new and you're just getting started, this is a great class for you. If you've been doing it for 30 years, like I have too, we hope to offer you some advanced knowledge too, that there's new research coming out every day. I found some really interesting stuff. I'll share the links today from Harvard and Cornell, and you know, it's just science that is still being discovered. So I thank you all for coming today. As an extra bonus for those of you who made the trip here in person, you will get the free sample of the compost and worm castings. Did everybody get theirs? Okay, great. And then we do have some pre-publications on the back table right behind Jeanette, and everybody should have got a raffle ticket, because at the end, the plants that I'm going to talk about, we're going to just raffle off so you guys can take them home if you want. So without ado, let's go ahead and get started. Let me grab this clicker thing. And hopefully it works. No, it doesn't work. Click over here. Now it works. Okay, so who here is familiar with the Florida-friendly landscaping principles? We got 1, 2, 3. Well, you guys need to come to more of my classes, or we have recordings, online webinars. But these are the 9 Florida-friendly principles, and they all work together to have a beautiful landscape that is environmentally friendly. So who's native to Florida here? All right, so you might know about the poor sandy soil and how everything struggles to grow here, except for the native plants. They do pretty good. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. Is anybody else from up north or somewhere other than Florida? So you might have come from a different climate where there's different plants, and maybe you had clay soil instead of sandy soil. And so it's just a very unique thing we have here in Florida. We have classes about all these principles, but today we're specifically going to be kind of talking about the recycling the yard waste and building soil fertility, which is kind of goes along with number 3. And, you know, just best management practices for your home garden or your commercial farm or whatever you're doing. So this class today is kind of broken up into 4 different parts. We're going to be talking about just simple Florida-friendly landscaping practices that everybody can do at home to build your soil, to hold moisture, to improve your plant health. We're going to talk about specific plants that can help you build your soil if you want to do it a little faster and a little bit more work. Also composting and worm composting, what to do with your food scraps. It's, you know, a very detailed subject. So we're just going to maybe talk about like the benefits and like composting versus worm composting. What are the pros and cons of each of them? And then finally, just some different amendments, mostly organic amendments to improve your soil fertility. This is not a fertilizer class, so we're not going to be talking about, you know, how to fertilize your plants appropriately with nitrogen and things like that. It's more about building your soil fertility And adding organic amendments is a great way to do that. Also with our summer fertilizer blend, we're banned from adding nitrogen and phosphorus right now through about October 1st. So these, like the kelp meal and stuff, these are some things that you can add to green up your lawn or your landscape that are not going to hurt our water quality. They don't have the nitrogen and they don't have the phosphorus. So you can apply them in the summer if needed. Just a couple brief measures. What is a healthy soil? What does that look like? Like, how do we measure it? On a very fundamental basis, you can hold it in your hand. And if it looks very sandy and white, it probably doesn't have too much in it. If it looks more like the bag of compost you have on your desk, dark and crumbly, it probably has more organic matter and better properties. So the first thing is the soil organic matter, like the amount of compost or organic matter. And like your bag of compost is very dark brown. So that's good for soil. Like the more organic matter, the better to some point. Another thing is just the soil structural stability. So when you grab a handful of it, like, does it stay together? Is it going to crumble apart? So we want, some nice aggregation and some particles. Like, we want it clumping. We don't want it compacted. We don't want it falling apart. We want some air spaces in there and whatnot. The third thing is bioavailable nutrients. So nutrients that are in the plant form that the plant can use. We're just going to talk about like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but the actual form the plants use is not just straight potassium. It's like KO2. So we're not going to get into those kind of details today. And the fourth thing is, what is the biology of the soil? Just like in our own human bodies, we have, biology in our gut and on our skin, and it helps with our digestive processes and nutrient uptake. Same exact thing in the plants. But, how are we going to measure that? That's a tricky one. So next slide here. Let's talk a little bit about soil science. So Florida's soils are generally sandy. They have a low cation exchange capacity, and that's the soil's charge with the ions that's able to hold the nutrients onto it. And it doesn't hold a lot of nutrients because of those first two properties. So looking at this scale here, you can see that sand has a low CEC, very low. It's not good at holding nutrients. When you go to clay, that's better. It has more of a charge to hold the nutrients. And what has the highest CEC? Organic matter. So that's, get your brain start turning here. Organic matter has the highest CEC. How do we improve our sandy soil? Add organic matter. So that's very simple concept. If you take nothing from this class today, just take that one home. So let's talk about reading a soil test. Who here has gotten their soil tested? All right, great. Very good. It's something that we recommend through UF-IFAS. You go to the doctor, the first thing they want to do is get your blood test. The soil test, what it does tell us is the phosphorus in the soil, the potassium, and then the other, macro and some micronutrients. In Florida soils, we have naturally high amounts of phosphorus. So most soil tests we get, like 99% of them, the phosphorus is in the good level. Another thing that the soil test usually shows us is the potassium. And potassium is needed by plants in the second most quantity to nitrogen. Potassium is usually low in Florida soil. So that's a nutrient that we have to pay attention to and maybe add it or grow plants or supplement it somehow. Now, what the soil test also tells us is our target pH here. or just our pH level. So, you know, a lot of the soil tests we get are in the good pH range, like 6.0, 5.5 to 7.0 is basically a good pH range. And about 90% of the soil tests we do here at the Extension Center come within that range. So the pH, you know, we don't have to mess with that too much. If you're growing something special like the blueberries or something, then you might want a low pH, or if you're down in South Florida, you might have a really high pH and you might want to lower it down some. But pH usually isn't a problem for us, but it's still always good to get your soil tested. Here at our Extension Center, you can check our soil testing website here. We do the pH test for $2, bring us about 1 cup of soil in a little Ziploc bag. If you want the full nutrient analysis like this, the nutrients, then you have to send it up to our lab in Gainesville, and that test is $10, I believe. Now, what the soil test does not tell you is a lot of very important information. One, it doesn't tell you that nitrogen. Nitrogen is the most needed nutrient for plant growth, but it doesn't tell you the nitrogen. And how come? Does anybody know? Nitrogen is very volatile, like it goes poof in the air. When I was doing my master's degree, I was studying nitrate in organic corn production, and we had to take our samples, put them in the cooler, and take them to the lab and immediately read those samples. If I would have left them out, you know, shipped them up to Gainesville, that nitrogen would be gone. And that's why we don't normally measure it. It can be measured, but you're going to pay a lot of money for that test. So our soil recommendations are usually based, here's the bottom, the recommendations. They're usually based on the assumption that you have 0 nitrogen in your soil. All right. It also doesn't tell you the % organic matter. Again, there are some tests that you can get that in your soil test, but normal ones don't tell you the % organic matter. Most Florida soil, you know, just native soil is going to have less than 1%. If you're doing organic gardening and putting in, you know, compost and mushroom compost and all kinds of composty stuff, then, you know, you might be up to 5%. That would be really, really good. Also the soil biology, this doesn't tell us, you know, how many beneficial microbes are in the soil. How do we learn that? That's a really tricky one. The best way is to use a microscope. And if you Google soil food web, Elaine Ingham, she has whole classes on how to use the microscope. You mix the soil with the water, and then you can actually see the bacteria and the fungi and the amoebas and everything floating around in there. So that's something that's hard to measure, but it is measurable, or you can kind of guesstimate based on what you know you put into the soil. And then the last thing here is the trace elements. So there's 17 essential nutrients for plant growth, and we usually measure, you know, maybe 12 to 17 of them, but some of these elements are in very small amounts and very hard to measure, and they're not included on standard soil tests. We'll get the standard things like magnesium and calcium, but we might lose some of the very small trace elements. And then there's other nutrients that are not considered essential, but considered beneficial, like silica, but we'll get into that later. So on to part 1 of this presentation, adding organic matter with landscaping activities. So step 1 here is all this information, by the way, is in this publication that I'm one of the lead authors on here. And you can scan the QR code. You can look up the publication. We'll put a link in the chat box for those of you joining us on Zoom. But this publication outlines these practices that I'm going to discuss here. So there's creative marketing slogans for all these. Grass cycling, just mow and go. Mow and go, okay? How many people use the mulching mower and mow and go? Good practice. Yeah.
I have no
lawn. Oh, no lawn. Oh, too bad. Too bad. So this is very beneficial because, you know, you water your lawn, you might fertilize your lawn. Why like take all those grass clippings and then ship them in a big truck to the landfill? Why not just use them in your yard? If you're doing mow and go all year long, one, it saves you time. Two, it saves you money. Three, it improves the soil health of your lawn and landscape. And four, it's kind of equivalent to about one fertilizer application per year. So if you're doing that, then maybe you can reduce the amount of nitrogen and potassium because those nutrients are being recycled. Now, and just the organic matter. So best mowing practices, you want to remove, you know, just a third of the grass blade. We like to grow it higher because that encourages more roots underground. And this does not result in thatch buildup. So I know some people are concerned about thatch, but this is not a problem for the thatch. The thatch is from the underground stems of the grass. Question. If you have weeds, well, if you mow it before the weed seeds, then that should be fine. Okay. Okay, how about another creative slogan, tree cycling? So the slogan here is leaf it be, just leaf it be. And in this case, you know, you get the oak trees, they fall on the earth, you rake them up. What do you do with them? Do you just put them in the landscape beds? Do you bag them and save them for your compost? Do you bag them and put them on the curb for the big truck to take to the landfill? You know, they do compost and recycle them at the landfill. So that's not a bad option too. But, you know, you want this in your yard. This is valuable stuff. Oak leaves actually do decompose, in case we get a lot of questions about that. Mango leaves decompose. Pretty much all leaves decompose. If you have a kind of tough leaf, it will decompose faster if you mow it, if you wet it, if you cover it with more mulch. Here, this is a beautiful example of pine trees, and they have a self-mulching. You know, they drop the pine leaves, and then you just rake them into the bed. And so you're making your own sustainable source of mulch here. If you live like in an HOA or you're really aesthetic kind of person and you don't like the look of this, then just buy a couple of your favorite bagged mulch, pine bark or whatever, and do this first and then cover it with the bark mulch. So the next thing is leaf mold. When these leaves, you know, are decomposing or you put them in your compost pile, you know, it makes a nice crumbly substance that is good for adding organic matter to your yard. And these are broken down, you know, a lot by the fungal networks, and you can use this for a variety of things, like adding it to your compost, mulching your plants with it, even adding it to your potting mix. You know, potting mix is getting expensive, maybe hard to come by. So let's talk briefly about mulches. Pretty much mulching is good. One thing that is bad for soil health is bare soil. Like Mother Nature doesn't want any bare soil. If there's bare soil, then they will cover it up with weeds. So, I mean, Mother Earth will do that. So these are the Florida friendly mulches that I have listed here, like the pine bark, pine straw, the fallen leaves, Melaleuca mulch, that's the invasive tree from South Florida. Sometimes they call it like flora mulch. The mixed hardwood, fine, that's good. Eucalyptus is similar to Melaleuca, and the utility mulch. The only thing we don't really like is cypress tree mulch, because cypress trees grow where? In the swamp. So it's just like questionable, like where are they getting these cypress mulch from? And they don't like, they're not required to list their sources of where. So we just avoid that because we don't want to contribute to the destruction of wetlands. But the utility mulch, it depends on what county you live in. If you're in Brevard County, I think they have free mulch. Orange County does not have free mulch. But check with your local municipalities. I think Winter Park might have free mulch, City of Winter Park. And this is just, you know, when they're out trimming the trees, or you can call your local tree trimmer. There's actually this really helpful website here, chipdrop.com, And you can sign up on there to get the tree trimmers to bring you a load of mulch. The only thing is they're going to bring you maybe like a 30-yard load of mulch. And you don't get to choose whether it's palm or oak, you know, so sometimes you'll get some beautiful oak mulch and other times it will have bamboo in it or something.
I've done that too.
Yeah.
And you are allowed to request no palm or no trunks,
Yeah.
but I requested not and I got it. So, right.
Yeah, well, a couple tree trunks, you know, put them around your yard. You know, but you never know what you're gonna get. So just pay attention, like make sure no weed seeds are coming up. If they are, just pull them out. But there's nothing really super toxic that can come in the mulch that's a biological. So kind of moving on, the reason why we want all this organic matter of all those practices that I just took is because organic matter is the base of the food chain in the soil. So the soil food web kind of starts with plants, and plants, you know, get carbon and sugars, you know, through photosynthesis, through the sun. And then when they die, there's this organic matter. Also, when they're living, I'll talk about that in a minute. But so the organic matter, all this composting type stuff, grass clippings, leaves, is going to be the food we're going to feed the microbes. And the microbes, what is a microbe? A microorganism, like, you know, like an earthworm, you can see, you know, crawling in the soil. The microbes you can't see. And so that's why we have these little pictures. Bacteria, they look like little pills, very microscopic. Also fungi, some of it is microscopic, some of it you can actually see with your naked eye, like the fruiting bodies. And then these are the foundation, the bacteria in the fungi. What eats those guys is the nematodes and the arthropods and the protozoa and the amoeba. So as any food chain works, you know, you're starting from one, and then these guys eat these guys, and these guys eat these guys. And every time somebody eats somebody, you know, then the last person, like, they poop it out and they make the soil better. So this is a lot of good nutrient cycling here. And, you know, it just promotes a healthy ecosystem. There's a saying by Rodale Institute, like healthy soil equals healthy people and healthy food. You know, it all goes together. So a little bit more about soil building. Let's talk about the living part of the soil food web. We were talking about the dead organic matter here, but the life in the soil. So the photosynthesis, and then the plant is making, you know, carbohydrates and sugar. So plants are really amazing. And what they do is they put out little root exudates. So these are organic acids, these are sugars. Their plants are putting this stuff out into the earth because it wants to attract microbes. It's like a dating pool, you know, under the ground. So the plant puts out a certain type of sugar and it attracts a certain type of bacteria or fungi, because, you know, like legumes, like the bacteria, and then trees more like fungi. So they attract who they want. So then it's attracting all the microbes, and then the big bacteria eat the little bacteria, and the amoebas eat the bacteria, and the whole food web is going on. And then the plants are also creating these organic acids. So we were talking about the pH of the soil. And so, like, if I just grab like a root here, for example, at the very tip of the root is where the plant is putting out these organic acids. And that is changing the pH right around the plant. So the plant doesn't care what the big pH is, because it can manage its own pH by the root tips and putting out that there. So that helps the plant get the minerals and the nutrients in a absorbable form, and the bacteria and the fungi also are attracted to that and help the nutrients become in a plant available form. So there's a whole microbiome here in the root, like the rhizosphere. Rhizo is just a fancy name for root going on. That is a whole science of itself. So enough of that. And Just one more very scientific picture, just showing this in action. You know, the rhizobia, that's a type of bacteria, and it's attaching onto the roots here. The mycorrhizae, the fungi, they also attach to the roots. And this is how we have a more sustainable agricultural system for your one plant or your for whole garden, because ultimately it can reduce the use of pesticides, because just like your own body, the beneficial microbes are helping to protect your body from everything else out there. And so here, for the plant protection, which we call, you know, to reduce the use of pesticides, these microbes are basically creating a coating all over all of the roots and helping to protect them. And same thing with the fertilizers, you know, they're all over. And so they're helping get the nutrient availability to the plants in a form that they like them. Here's a picture of the fungi, kind of like fungal roots are called hyphae, and the roots are available to the naked eye right there. You can see these little fungal threads, the little white things. So this white stuff you see growing in your landscape, maybe in your mulch, is good. Like the green stuff that grows on the bread, like maybe not so good for you, but the white stuff growing in the mulch is good. And this white stuff is the roots of like mushrooms. Now, not all fungi are mushrooms, but this is just, you know, for dummies here. The white stuff under the ground, and then kind of like a flower, when it's like, okay, it's time for me to bloom, boop, pops up a little mushroom. And so, like I said, these are helping to exchange the nitrogen and the phosphorus to the plants. It's taking the roots sugary exudates. So they're exchanging, they're like dating here, and they're exchanging substances. And these mycorrhizal networks are really cool because they actually connect plants together. So this is really interesting stuff here by Harvard University. So it's legit. I didn't make it up. The mycorrhizal networks, so they're connecting the plant roots of these two plants. In this example, it's from up north, but the tree on the left is the birch tree, and the tree on the right is a fir tree. So two completely different types of trees. And so it's like, well, this one needs a little bit more of this nutrient. This one needs a little bit more of this nutrient, and they're exchanging the nutrients, and the whole forests are connected by these mycorrhizal networks. So this is really interesting. Some people call it like the nervous system of the forest, because it's all living. It's also a carbon sink, you know, for climate change. Tons of beneficial information here. So I hope that gave you a good introduction for the beginners and the more advanced people. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Christian to talk a little bit more about compost and worm composting. Here is your clicker. Thanks so much for coming. That one right there.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Christian. Thanks for coming out today. My father, we run a business called Revival Gardening. We make worm castings from soils, and we're thankful for Extension and Tia for inviting us to be co-teachers here. But I will kind of briefly go over composting. So what is compost? We gave you a sample of that in a baggie, but it's that rich, black, sweet smelling, should smell like the earth. It's a soil-like substance comprised of decomposed organic matter. So as Tia was covering, you'll want to add that into your yards, your vegetable gardens. But a brief overview of composting. You're disposing of your food and yard waste through the natural process of hot composting, which you're doing a ratio of brown and green, and then like a lasagna, adding the correct amount of water and air, turning it. So you're breaking this down over time. All these organisms are decomposing all that organic matter, but you're using this to enhance your soil and also to release essential elements to your plants. Why you should compost? Once again, you're converting your yard debris in an environmentally friendly way. you're reducing the amount of solid waste that you have to dispose of while providing useful and beneficial kind of microorganisms to your garden. It's an excellent soil amendment. You're improving your soil health and its structure. It contains beneficial microorganisms again, but you can add it to your potting soil, garden beds, and there's something we can do called making compost tea, which is a whole brewing aspect. We'll keep that short. These are what composting bins look like. This is actually at our extension here in the vegetable garden. So you can actually kind of see this afterward, but you're going to start lasagnaing your brown and green waste products. And over time, you'll turn that, add water, and you'll start creating that organic matter you see in the bag you have. Yeah, so the applications of using compost, you can incorporate that into a potting mix, mix it into your garden beds, top dress that on your turf, your shrubs and trees as well, and making compost tea. But what we specialize in, go more in depth, is worm composting. So it's a cold composting, which is a different thermic level. So you're going to get more bacteria, more microorganisms than you would in hot compost. So the way you're going to do this is you're using composting worms to reduce or recycle your food scraps, paper, carbon sources, strawberries, fruits, scraps, all that. But you're using a special type of composting worm. Usually it's the red wiggler, if you're familiar with those. But these are special worms that live on the top surface, 6 inches. So they break down that waste and then kind of keep building up, and they go up to the surface, leaving the casting at the bottom. Yes, sir.
Question for you on the newspapers. Is it okay, just any newspaper with all that ink and all that, that's okay?
So
No
if it's
color.
laminated, yeah,
No color, no shining.
stay away from that. If you want to shred those up before you add it in as well, it helps break it down quicker. But there are also other species. We kind of actually sell some called European red nightcrawlers and Indian blues. And they can actually work together in subtropical and tropical temperatures. So they might be better in Florida with the temperature swings. Also, they can cohabitat, so they're not going to interbreed, but you can produce castings and cocoons year round. So this is kind of the stuff you want to feed your worms. Worms can eat about half their body weight a day. You want to do vegetable scraps, coffee filters, coffee grounds, tea bags. You can also crush eggshells, pasta, bread, cereals. But on larger scales, we kind of use compost as a bedding. So that's another step you could transition, is if you have compost, you can use it as the bedding for your worms themselves. So you can start supercharging your compost with their gut biome. So yeah, you just want to chop the food, leave a layer until they break it down. Once you see that it's broken down, then you'll add another layer and just keep building up your vermicompost. These are some things you don't want to feed your worms. Okay, so meat, cheese, oils, stay away from citrus and onions, just a quick kind of thing you want to remember. So the benefits to worm composting as a homeowner. So you're decaying your food waste, your scraps, instead of sending that to the landfill. That's something you could do. It's actually faster than composting. Actually can do it indoors, takes less space, something maybe you can consider. But what the worms are doing is they're excreting a casting, and that's rich in nutrients available in plant form, which is in the bags we gave you as well. That's a sample we make. But the biome or the gut system of the worm is what carries all the microorganisms. So as they're passing it through, it's coating the casting and leaving it there to feed the plant afterward. I don't know, maybe not. But next, I guess if we can. Let me see if okay, I got it. Thank you. Okay, so worm castings themselves, think of it as just worm poop. Right. So the benefits of this is to improve soil structure as well, provide plant nutrients as an organic form. But you're also going to provide protection from pests and disease while adding beneficial microbes into the soil. And it's also a slow release organic way of fertilizing it.
So on the rice or the pasta, does that have to be already cooked? Or can you put like raw
Actually,
rice
I
in
think
there?
raw can work. I believe.
Yeah, you can use raw grains, just gotta grind it up into a powder.
Uh,
Might be better for it in your regular compost pile, but you could put a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, like a diverse diet actually is okay for the worms. They actually kind of like want to switch up a little.
Yeah.
So the difference between worm leachate and worm tea, if you're familiar with worm systems or like a worm bin like we have here, if it gets too much moisture, it kind of starts dripping to the bottom and actually can like drip out, and that's what we call leachate. That just means you have a little bit too much moisture in there, and we don't necessarily recommend using that unless you kind of know what you're doing, because it kind of sits and it could just get kind of funky. It's not really recommended. A worm tea is where you would actually get the castings themselves and brew it and then create a foliar spray or a soil drench application. But let me see. So the way we make the worm tea is we'll take the worm castings, put it in a nylon bag, brewing it in a 5-gallon bucket of water for 24 hours. We kind of use an air stone to just bubble it up a little more. Get the microbes actually population size increased. But then we use it right away. We want to make the worm tea and use it as quickly as possible so we can get all those good biology into the plant. But we can add molasses, sugar, kelp meal, other amendments we'll talk about here into the tea to kind of supercharge your tea to make organic applications of fertilizers. We recommend spraying it in the morning before 10 o'clock or in the evening after 4. That's the best time when the sun's not on it, so it won't evaporate that water or that tea.
When you say brew it, you're not talking about heating it up, it's just.
Yeah, we're just putting in a bucket of water and just letting it sit.
Aeration, what kind of area do you have
An air stone, if you're familiar, have you ever seen an air stone before where it's just hooked up to like a
Like in a fish tank.
like a fish tank, yeah. And then we just bubble that up overnight and
The
use it in the
one,
morning.
the one caution, and everyone forgets this. So if you have city tap water, it's got chlorine in it. What does chlorine do? It kills things. That's why they put it in pools. So if you're trying to make living soils or create good biology, and you're using the tap water straight, you're just putting chlorine on it. You're just kind of defeating the purpose. So, okay, so how do I get non-chlorinated water without going and buying a jug? Fill a bucket, stick it out in the sun for the day. Usually enough of that gas is off that you can then use that water to make worm tea, a compost tea, or any other teas.
Something to consider. Okay, back to Tia. Thank you.
Can I have a quick question? How does that keep the plant, the pest and the disease away from?
Yeah, so there's some studies by some other universities where it's showing the microbes in there are working with the root system to, I guess, make a stronger.
Well, there's good bacterias that go after the bad things, like the bad bugs and other bad things in your soils. And like Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus amplifications, these are natural in the castings. And there's a whole thing going on with biology, but basically there's good bacteria in there that go after the bad things, and some of that is actual pest control. But there's also nutrients in the castings, it's in plant form. So when you make a tea that you spray on the leaves, you got to make sure you spray underneath. A lot of those nutrients can be taken right up in the leaf and be made available right into the plant right away. A lot of it goes down into the soil and becomes part of the soil network, and it's taken up into the roots, so it becomes systemic within the plant itself.
I got another question. So what would be the difference between like liquid seaweed spraying on a plant for this worm tea or even stump tea?
So each one of these items has different benefits based on what's in it. So if you buy a seaweed extract, okay, depends on how organic you want to be. Seaweed extracts, worm tea extracts that sit on the shelves, they have a preservative. Is that organic? Yeah, well, you do your research.
Right.
Make it fresh. You don't need it, use it right away, but we'll talk about what's in the sea, North Atlantic sea kelp. And when you see everything that's in there, it's in plant form, you go, okay, great, if I can get a tea with this, And they're actually using out in the orange groves, they're using the gibberellic acid from the North Atlantic sea kelp to help fight the greening situation, fruit drop and blossom drop. And this was just published out a week ago.
Right.
So I mean, this is how fast this stuff is going, but we're not doing anything different. We're just doing what our grandparents did.
Sure.
But now they're putting the science behind why it worked. So all these different things, all these different items in a tea bring something to that tea. Okay,
So would you say that it's better to have like a certain seaweed for location?
North Atlantic sea kelp is the only thing that works. It's not stuff we get on our beaches. Think about it this way. How many seaweed companies do we have here in Florida? Zero, because it doesn't work. Okay, so we'll get into that when we get into all the ingredients, why these different things work, but yeah.
Great, so on to part 3. You guys having fun yet?
Yes.
All right, good. So now we get to talk about plants. This is like the poor man's fertilizer. So plants to build soil. Here we go. Here we go. Grasses. Grasses are covering a large portion of the earth, and Mother Nature did it that way for a reason. Why? Because they're really resilient, they grow great, they're like drought tolerant, they're food for other things. Here in Florida, here's a couple, grasses you might have in your common, like Florida friendly landscape, like lemongrass. That's this one. You can make the tea out of that for you edible folks. Cordgrass, these are native. Muley grass, also native. The one I have up here is Fakahatchee grass, and this is native. And there's also vetiver grass and sugarcane for the foodies here. And grasses all produce a lot of biomass. Biomass is just like living tissue. And so they also contain a lot of carbon. Now we're thinking about fertilizers. Carbon isn't really on the NPK label, but carbon is a very important part because it's creating that organic matter that's feeding the microbes and so on and so forth. So you can basically grow these grasses as your own little cave factory to make your own mulch. Like if the chip drop doesn't deliver to your house because you live in the country, you can just cut these guys. And then this is very high in carbon. It also has some silica in it, and it's kind of slow to decompose. So you can use this as a mulch. You can add it to your compost pile. You could cut it up smaller and add it to your worm bin. And that is going to last for a while and have carbon and some other things. It's going to feed the microbes. And these grasses grow fast. So you're going to get a lot of biomass here. You can trim these guys and give these guys a haircut several times a year to be building that soil. Like the sugarcane we have back in our garden, it's 15 feet tall. So it's a lot of plant matter. So the next thing we're going to talk about is nitrogen fixers. So now we're getting into the NPK. Here I have a pigeon pea. So we have perennial peanut pictured here. You can use that as an alternative lawn. It actually, every time you cut it and mow and go, you're leaving those perennial peanut clippings that contain nitrogen and carbon on the ground to feed your soil. So you barely even have to fertilize that. Like I have that in my lawn. You don't have to, I don't fertilize it at all, but other legumes like beans and peas, the pigeon pea, which I have right here, and then clover, veg, cover crops like sun hemp. These are all in the legume family. And almost all legumes create symbiotic relationships with nitrogen fixing bacteria like the rhizobia I have on the slide. And so the bacteria are living in the roots and they're actually helping to produce the nitrogen that then the plant uptakes. And so this one is another one you can just cut. They call it chop and drop. And so you cut some of this, and this is high in nitrogen. But see how like leafy this is? this is gonna biodegrade pretty quickly. Whereas the carbon stuff, like the grasses, this is gonna stick around much longer. So, you know, if you are, you wanna make your own fertilizer, more or less, you know, you can cut some of this stuff up and put it in your compost pile or mulch your plants with it. And there you have carbon and nitrogen. And there's so many different legumes. This is just a short list to get you started. And then there's other plants like these bananas. This is a banana plant here. And ginger, same thing with the gingers. Now, these just kind of create a lot of biomass. They grow quickly. They like more like shady, wet spots in your landscape. And so what you can do is you can cut these and then they will regrow. And again, cut them into smaller pieces and you can make a humongous compost pile just on having like these 3 plants in your yard. All right, and so also these plants are easy to propagate. Like this one, we could divide into 3 plants. This one, we could probably make 5 out of it. The peas grow easily from seed. Some people inoculate. You ever hear of inoculating your legume seed, like soybeans and stuff, with some of the beneficial bacteria when you buy the seed? Like if you go to a seed catalog, for example, Johnny's seed, you can buy the bean inoculant to coat the seed before you plant it. So you make sure you have the bacteria in there. But otherwise, if you're just growing all these in your landscape, the beneficial microbes will naturally find them. Some people even recommend to have, if you have like an annual vegetable garden where you're tilling that often and disturbing, maybe killing the microbes, if you have some kind of perennial hedgerow next to that, like your fruit trees and stuff, where the, you know, soil life can live uninterrupted. These ginger type plants are really good for just creating a lot of organic matter, the biomass, and they're fleshy, perennial, quick growing. This one you can cut several times a year. And banana, especially the banana trees, you know, when you eat a banana, you know, they're high in potassium. Like we just know that certain foods are high in certain nutrients. Well, banana plant tissue is also high in potassium. So whereas most plant tissues are like 1% potassium, the banana tissue is 3% potassium, you know, by weight. So when the leaves fall off or after you harvest a bunch of bananas and then you cut the plant down, you know, you can kind of chop and drop that like this picture here, and then all the carbon and the nutrients will kind of soak back into the soil. If you were to chop this up more, it would happen faster, but even letting it be like that is fine. You just don't want to be doing this if you have a diseased plant, but these are all nice and clean and healthy here. This one here is the shampoo ginger, which I have in the pots here. We'll be raffling some of those off at the end. And this is just a butterfly ginger. It smells really good. So let's talk about silica now. Silica is not one of those essential plant nutrients, but they call it a beneficial element to help with the plant. And grasses, also the horsetails, we have some of that in our exploration gardens. Rice hulls, bamboo. Bamboo is the highest containing plant for silicate. Silicon is the element. Silica is what we call more the plant available form. So we just call it silica for the purposes of this class here. And this is where I found these numbers for how much % of the plant contains silica. And so you can look at these resources here and find out more. But bamboo is an amazing plant. It is a grass and it grows huge, some of them up to 65 feet tall. We do have 7 different varieties of bamboo that were donated by Bamboo Forever. They're a local bamboo nursery in our exploration garden. So if you want to walk around after the class today, you can go check those out. Silica helps with plants like plant protection, climate change, drought, salinity, heavy metal toxicity. So it's just like one of those super vitamins, and there's a lot of research being done on silica. Some researchers with the University of Florida are doing trials on silica in plants. There's a ton of stuff out there already, but we're still, developing the latest and greatest science. And then the last kind of nutrients I want to talk about is just all these other plants. Just like when you go to the grocery store, bananas are high in potassium and, fish is high in protein. So every plant has a unique ability to pull certain nutrients out of the soil. And this permaculture concept of dynamic accumulators or plants, that have deep roots and are amazing at pulling these nutrients out of the soil. They are called dynamic accumulators. And so often these plants have 200% more nutrients than other plants. So I was talking about the banana, 3% potassium, whereas most other plants have 1%. So that's at least 200% more. And so they created, a longer list. I just mentioned a couple here, and you can look more on this article from Cornell University about this work with the dynamic accumulators. But the general message here is that plants are amazing for working with the microbes, pulling up these nutrients out of the earth and making them into a form that you can do something with. Now, you do have to kind of cut them to get those nutrients out. Otherwise, it's going to be held in the plant body. So the kind of chop and drop or chop and cut and carry method, put it in your compost, do something with it, mulch with it. And that way the plants are, the nutrients are released and as the microbes break them down. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Mark. Mark's going to talk to you about soil amendments. So if you're too lazy to do all this grow plants yourself and do the cut and make compost, or if you're really rich and you have a lot of money, the more love you put into your plants, the more organic matter and stuff, the better. Most of the stuff we're going to talk about is organic soil amendments. Like I said in this class, we're not really talking about fertilizer. You do have to be careful with fertilizer because it will burn your plants with the salt. So too much of that, but most of this organic stuff, it's not possible to burn your plants. So I'll pass it over to Mark. Thanks for coming today, Mark.
Okay, which was that?
This is the next button.
Okay,
All right.
all right. So my name is Mark Robinson. I'm a Master Gardener volunteer here. My son speaking before, we also have our own business. So we do worm castings and we do organic living soils. And so we're big on the amendments. And we always tell our customers that, your first garden, if you've never had a garden here, and if you've all bought your first soil for your raised bed, your first tomato is a $200 tomato, right? So if you're rich, you don't feel like doing all this chop and drop, you keep spending money and buy these amendments, okay, and work with these amendments. But what we always tell people is you should be doing this with the other plants. And so if you look out in a forest and you look at it as a bug hole here and there, but basically it's in balance. And it's because all these different plants are doing different things, falling onto the surface of the earth. The organisms, the worms, the mycelium is all taken in. It's all part of this big web. But the forest is in balance and it's healthy. And the soil is not pure sand. So if you want to get there and you don't want to spend money, that's what you do. You want to spend money and do this, or if you need a vegetable now, you start with this while you're learning how to grow these different things, while you're composting or vermicomposting, so you can do a mix.
Yeah, and let me add that not everything is native to our Florida soils. I used to live in Hawaii and they had volcanoes there. Florida was never a volcano. So there's certain nutrients and elements that we just can't get out of our soil, no matter what plant you plant. And Mark will talk about the rock dust, but I just want to make sure that some things
you're going to have to bring in,
yeah.
But once you bring them in, if you cycle them through, okay, they'll always be there for you. And then it's less and less inputs, more and more fruits. So let's get started here. Let's talk about soil amendments from the ocean. So there's kelp meal, and seaweed, okay, but it's North Atlantic sea kelp. It's not the stuff on our beaches. And I was telling you guys earlier, do you see all these places collecting seaweed and selling it here? No, because it doesn't work. It's North Atlantic sea kelp. North Atlantic sea kelp, what it does, it pulls all the nutrients out of the ocean. It grows like 30 feet tall, and it's actually comes under the North Atlantic Treaty where it's all handled the same way. It grows, they chop it, they harvest it out, they sun dry it, and they chop it into different grades. So it's organic. It's because it's already in a plant form. You can use this in soil. You can use this in teas. It's ready to go right up into the plant. Okay. One grade they chop is for horses, one's for dogs, one's for your vitamins, very expensive. Or you can buy it in the agricultural form, which is the same dang thing. Okay, and feed it to your plants. Crustacean meal. So some people just call it crab meal. It's mostly crab meal, shrimp shells, lobster shells, all kind of ground up. And we're going to show you what this stuff looks like. Oysters, calcium carbonate for liming purposes, adjusting pH. Okay. Aragonite, which is a shell meal, it actually happens off the Bahama Banks here. And what it does, this organism, it pulls calcium carbonate out of the sea and it drops it. It looks like sand and they use it as sand. And it's actually called oolitic aragonite in its oval form, but it's a very highly structured form of calcium carbonate. Okay, but it's carbon, what is it? Carbon negative, and it just keeps replenishing itself. So it's pretty good for using for the earth. And then there's fish emulsions. Okay. Kelp meal. Let's see. So kelp meal. This is what it looks like when it's chopped in an agricultural form. And if we're doing, well, let's talk about what it is. So it's Ascophyllum nodosum. That's the kelp we're talking about. Okay. And the benefits, it has nutrients that are available to the plant. So you can see right here, macronutrients, micronutrients, vitamins, amino acids, and it's not on the slide, but gibberellic acid, okay, which is a growth hormone. The NPK is 1.0, so not really an NPK thing as much as it is all these nutrients, okay? A lot of that's not here. So when you bring kelp in, you're doing that. Crab meal, okay, they made me put the lid back on. But it's crushed crab shells and it smells like crushed crab shells, been sitting out in the sun for a while. We put a little bit of that in our soils here. So it's from the crab harvest. It has chitin in it, okay? And that chitin helps to go after root knot nematodes. So it's got some different things. It also will feed beneficial microbes, okay? It promotes plant growth. There's calcium carbonate in it. You put it down about 5 pounds per 100 square feet. So you can see the NPK 430. When we say these rates here, as we go through this, it says 5 pounds per 100 square feet. Is that a 100 square foot garden that's on the ground? Is it a 6-inch deep raised bed? A 12-inch deep raised bed? Is it in a pot? So those numbers aren't set in stone, okay? It can be adjusted. And we'll show you kind of what we do later. Amendments from the earth, rock dust, dolomitic lime, and then there's some plant-based stuff. The dolomitic lime is the liming agent. It's got some magnesium in it, but this is the rock dust, okay? This rock dust contains the minerals. We don't have this here in our soils. We never did. We never had a volcano, and if we did, anything you had would have leached right through the sand over thousands of years. Okay, but it's got a lot of these trace elements. And so there's different types. There's azomite, there's glacial, and there's basalt. You got to bring all this in. Azomite has some heavy metals in it. If you're using it for fruit trees in general, it's not a big deal. Basalt is like the purest form. The benefits, it remineralizes the soil, and it's good for many years. So where kelp, we want to put, and the plants take it up right away. The rock dust, you can put down 5, 7, 10 years. It'll last in your soils, okay? Because it takes, weather's got to break it down, microorganisms attached to it, what have you. And then the rate here is 5 to 50 pounds per 100 square feet. Here in Florida, don't put the full recommended rate down if you got a lot of sand, because it's just going to leach through. So we always tell people start with the lower amount, and as you build your humus, your organic matter, then you can add more over time till you get to that rate, and that'll be in your soils. So we use this on fruit trees, and you can see a doubling in height the first year. And it's only because the sand doesn't have anything and we're adding the nutrients to it. Let's see, dolomitic lime. I don't have anything to show you, but that's what they sell at Home Depot. This is what people add to potting mixes. It's a compound, calcium and magnesium. And so we're showing here that most vegetables, as Tia mentioned earlier, 5.8 to 6.3 or 5.5 to 7. And sometimes in our potting mixes, if we're using Canadian sphagnum peat moss, we have to add some of this dolomitic lime to bring the pH up in the potting mix. We use that sphagnum peat in a potting mix, not in the soils. Below 5.5 indicates a need for lime. And if you're going for more than 7, applying lime is really a little benefit. 2 to 3 pounds of dolomitic lime per 100 square feet. There is a publication here that tells you how to apply it and what to do with it, so you can learn more about it. Silica. So we have Axil 16H, which is a powder form of silica, so that we can mix it right away. Tia was talking about Fakahatchee grass and rice hulls. Those are the natural ways to do it. But it's the available form of silicon. This is a movable element in the plant. So the plant can take this up, and if it needs cell wall protection on its leaf, it can put it there. If it needs cell wall protection or enhancement in the xylem and phloem where the fluids go, okay, you can put it there so it can help take up nutrients better. We swear by this. We use this in different teas. We apply it directly. Heat stress, cold stress, nutrient uptake, salt protection. You can actually use this to emulsify neem oil. If anybody's familiar with neem oil, for like when they have a pest problem, you got to emulsify that. I mean, you got to turn it to something milky. You got to break it down so it's not oil floating on water. And there's different ways to do it, Dr. Bonner soap or things of this, or saffonin, but this stuff here will emulsify that as well. So while you're emulsifying the oil to get a better spray, you're also giving it the benefits, okay? A half a teaspoon per gallon of water goes a long ways. And they actually make this to go into what they call a fertigation system. So commercial operations that are irrigating, they can actually put it in the irrigation. Aloe vera plant, magic for plants. Everyone knows aloe vera in the cosmetics. They know it for sunburn, for healing wounds, for shampoos, whatever. Plants love aloe vera. And so what you're seeing here is the gel, okay, and that green part's the outer leaf. And all you would do is you would fillet it basically like a fish, meaning we're going to cut the top green layer off. You'll have this gel. You'll dip it in non-chlorinated water, right? A couple of times to get the yellow off so it looks just like this clear gel. Then you can put it in a blender with non-chlorinated water, and you can bubble it or let it sit overnight and brew it, make a tea, okay? This actually comes from the Aloe barbadensis plant, the one that we can eat, we can use. It grows in our soil like crazy, throws out pups, so it self-propagates, okay? You can also take fresh aloe vera if you want to propagate and need rooting gel. You can just dip the end of your plant stem in it. We have a powder that we use because we're on the run and we don't have time to fillet it and sit for 24 hours. And all it is dried aloe vera plant. Okay. So this promotes growth. It helps take nutrients up. It contains ace-mannan, saponins, and salicylic acid. This kicks the SAR, the systemic acquired resistance of a plant into gear. So we find plants that are stressed. We'll take aloe vera and we'll take that Axil and we'll mix that and apply it with foliar drench. And it makes the plant jump up and want to do its own fighting. And so if you got nutrients in the soil, that plant can start taking care of itself and fighting off different diseases or different abiotic stresses, the heats and things. So again, we're just using plants to feed plants, just that it's coming in a powdered form or we're taking the leaf and we're using that. So we're using plants for these different processes. Alfalfa meal. It's milled alfalfa. It's a legume, Medicago sativa. It promotes plant growth. It has micronutrients and natural growth hormones. This is the poor man's kelp. This is what our grandparents used to use before fertilizer came around. Okay, it has a lot of nitrogen. We recommend you don't put this directly. Where's my kelp? Oh, the alfalfa. There you go. So you all saw what the kelp meal looked like. Here's what alfalfa meal looks like when it's ground up. Okay, very dusty. Do not put this directly on your plants. It could burn your plants. What people do is they make a tea and they just basically put it in a bucket of non-chlorinated water. Okay, and they let it sit there and stir it once in a while until all of that settles after 3, 4, 5 days. And the water, you can use the water. You won't burn your plants. People use this in combination with other ingredients for, they have a tea for rose bushes. They have a tea for vegetables. They can get kind of crazy. Neem meal. So neem meal is the byproduct of the neem nut. When they crush that to get neem oil, they get a meal. Okay, and that looks like this. It smells like almost like a coffee. Okay, when they crush that, 10% of that oil is still left in that cake. So you talk about using neem oil to fight pests or problems. Some of that oil is still left in that cake, that meal. What neem meal does, it enhances plant growth, gives you plant protection. It encourages beneficial microbes and prolongs the availability of nitrogen. You heard Tia talk about nitrogen just gassing off and escaping. Neem meal helps hold that nitrogen in there so the plants can get into it. This stuff we put in the soil, we make teas with it because again, we get the other 200 constituents that they're still studying. You know, what's really in all this stuff, right? Not just the azadirachtin or the neem that you hear about for pest control. There's other things in it. 2 to 5 pounds per 100 square feet. Okay, we usually put a half a cup per cubic foot of soil if we're making a potting mix, just to give you an idea. So you can be flexible. Karanja meal, also known as Pangamia meal, is from the Pangamia pinnata tree. Same thing, it's a nut, and they crush it to get the oil out. And then the meal's left over. It still has some of that oil in there and all these other constituents. The benefits are it's plant protection. It contains micronutrients, chitin, and it encourages beneficial organisms. The oil from this tree, this is now grown here in Florida and processed here in Florida for the first time, and it's organic. The oil can be used for biodiesel. They're using it for food oil, cosmetics, paints. I go on and on. Both the Karanja and the neem on the slide before are used in health and beauty products. Okay, these are all perfectly safe things to use. Again, 2 to 5 pounds per 100 square feet, we use a half a cup. Malted grains, barley in particular. This is what it looks like when it's all ground up. It's almost like a powder. Okay. We use barley because it's the cheapest, but any malted grain will do. And so what is a malted grain? It's a grain that has been soaked to start the sprouting process, and then it's stopped. What this is actually used for, it's in the brewing industry. It's how you make beer. You use a malted grain, okay? So this grain contains sugars, enzymes, and good fungi to feed the microbes in the soil. It just rocket charges like a plant puts out natural sugars as part of what it needs to go down and work with microbes to break compounds into single elements to make it bioavailable. We're supercharged. We're adding that directly to the soil or making teas with it. Worms love this. Okay, the worms love this. A cup per square foot. Biochar. So what it is, it's wood that has been burned in a low oxygen environment. Think of charcoal. Okay. The benefits, it's very stable in soils. It lasts a long time. It's porous. It does vary depending on the feedstock. And it's generally used for acidic soils. For best results, you should charge it, meaning you soak it in non-chlorinated water with other goodies to put the different micro and macronutrients into it. What they're really using this stuff for is to macroremediate or to pull heavy toxic metals out of contaminated soils. That's what biochar is really being used for out there. We like to say no more than 2% because that's what we're recommended by the biochar. Everybody's got a different thought and feeling. Yeah, it puts carbon back in the soil, but if I got to make biochar, I'm also putting gases in the atmosphere. So there's a publication here that you can read about it and do your own research on biochar if you want to add that to your soil. Okay. You need this?
Thanks, Mark. And show them the biochar.
The biochar. Yeah. So it just looks like charcoal. Let's see, it comes in different grades and sizes, very porous. And if you do charge it right, it can be very beneficial, but you got to do, again, the feedstock. You got to figure out what you're charging it with and all that, and then how you're going to apply it to your particular soil. And that goes back to soil testing.
Yeah, we actually have 3 different University of Florida edicts documents on the biochar, and it all depends, like, it depends on what are you trying to grow, what is your soil like, you know, if you have acidic, sandy soil, it will probably work better if you have alkaline soil already, like the biochar is alkaline. So it kind of depends, you'll hear that a lot, depends on what are you growing and what's in it, so we're gonna wrap it up here with a couple of practical applications. Now that we've given you all these different things you can add to your garden in different ways, well, how do you actually do it? So how do you want to beef up your potting mix? People show me pictures. Okay, this plant I grew in whatever type of soil, this soil, you know, I added compost, worm castings to, and boom, the plant is big. So, you know, same conditions, environmentally different soil. I mean, if the soil is all that plant has to live in, you know, you better put some good food in there for it. And, you know, depending on the plant too, you know, cactuses, they don't like a lot of nutrients. They like very drained soil. But if you're trying to grow a banana tree, they're going to take all the, you know, good stuff you can give them. And then boom, you're going to get a 20-foot banana with 100 pounds of fruit on it. So what do we use in the potting soil? So potting soil already has like pea, perlite. You want it to be light and fluffy and porous because it's in a container and it's not having the worms and the natural stuff to aerate the soil. So you can mix in some of that leaf mold. You can mix in some compost, worm castings, all that organic stuff. They say 20% of the soil mix. So you don't want too much organic stuff in your potting soil because it will be too heavy and too wet and your plant might rot. You may need the lime to adjust the pH if you're using a lot of the peat. What do you guys use in your potting mix? You brought a sample of it today, right?
Yes. So what we do is we take, yes, right here. We take actually a third sphagnum peat moss. We think of that as a chassis. Everything else can strap to. And then we put perlite in it. So it just looks like a potting mix you see in the store, but there's other things in here. A third of the perlite, which is just pop rock is all it is, but it's very light, creates aeration and drainage. And then a third organic matter, OM. But our OM, like she was saying, 20%, isn't just pure like a compost. It's actually a Florida peat, which is basically leaves that have fallen into a lake over thousands of years, right? Kind of like the leaf mold, which is very good stuff. And to that, we actually add rice hulls to lighten that up. Why? Well, one, it lightens it up, more aeration, more drainage. But when the rice hulls break down, it's putting carbon back into the soil. And that's silica, that silicon that we've been talking about. So cell wall strengthening. And that's the basis. And then to that, we add all these ingredients that we were talking about because they all put something different in the soil. Rock dust, this is basalt, and it just looks almost green, right? But this has all those elements that are gonna be there for a long term. Once we put this in our soil, along with our worm castings for the biology, because without the biology in your soil, you might as well just use chemicals. You got to have the biology to make all this work, to make the plants work. But once you have a living soil, if all you do is simply replace whatever that particular plant you have takes out, you'll always have a living soil, there are all the nutrients out. And so once you get your soils up to a living soil with everything that a plant needs, the plants will take care of themselves. Then you compost, you worm cast,
You try to create that closed loop.
create that closed, exactly, and then it just, everything gets healthier, better and better, because things keep breaking down and breaking down. And these nutrients just keep getting cycled. And all these microorganisms, they're still studying a lot of this stuff, how this works like this. Okay, but we're getting amazing results by doing these living soils. I don't have a forest in my backyard to provide that to me. I have to bring it in. Okay, so these are just these strategies I would say you could use in combinations, just depending on where you're at,
Right? What you
what you
growing,
want to grow.
what
you
you
know.
have available.
Yep,
If you love to eat oysters, grind those up. Put those in there.
yeah, all your crab shells. If you want to sit there and let it sit in the sun and break them all up, it's
Right,
great for the
eggshells.
soil.
Uh-huh.
If you have the space and you mind the
Right.
smell
And the time,
and the time.
right?
It's time or money or a combination is what it is. Okay, but you could get there with zero money. It just takes a lot more time. And you would need the space.
Did you say worm casting was a third of that soil?
No, in the actual OM, okay, we put about 20% worm castings overall.
Like 20%, no more than 20% of any like organic stuff like compost, worm castings, leaf mold. that-
Right, you gotta
that
get-
organic stuff.
The more variety, the better. But the reason we don't put more than 20%, it won't burn a plant. Kid and pet friendly. You're just wasting your money.
Right,
Right.
right, no benefit.
There's no benefit, no derived benefit, but you don't get any more out of the plants.
You had the organic matter, the perlite, what was the other third?
Sphagnum peat moss.
Like coconut core or something for the fiber.
Yeah, these are getting harder to find too, by the way.
Yeah, sort of.
Okay, they've had shortages and there's shortage now like vermiculite you can't get.
That's something that you can grow.
The
yourself?
sphagnum peat
Yeah.
moss?
You
No,
can grow
that's,
coconuts here.
you
and
can
then
grow the
grind
coconuts. but you can't do the Canadian sphagnum peat. That comes from Canada, a certain bog, and it is sustainably harvested. They only do so much a year.
Yeah.
That's why they're short. During COVID, everyone had time to garden. We had 20 million new gardeners per year. They
Yeah.
ran out of sphagnum peat moss.
Right,
Okay, no kidding.
right.
We had to bring it in by the truck just so we
Well, then
had
they
some.
shut down the facilities and you had such demand.
Well, no, they
that
just,
can't
the
get-
first year they had a bad harvest, the next year, the demand just, they only take so much a year.
Wow.
But you can grow coconuts and you can
Right.
take the coconut out.
Yeah.
The sphagnum peat moss doesn't really do that much for you, other than, like I said, everything's strapped to it.
Light.
Yeah.
And it's light and fluffy.
Yeah.
You can do it with coconut.
Yeah, and for those of you who are here in person, you get a bonus free sample. Thanks to Revival Gardening, everybody, you can come up afterwards and get a little pot of their potting soil, their special mix that they make, and then you can compare it to whatever else you make at home and see how the plants grow. So let's keep going here. Compost teas. So this is another great way to get your amendments and your biology out on your plants, just from putting, a couple cups of your compost or worm castings and then putting it in the bucket with the aeration for 24 hours, non-chlorinated water, and then spraying it out on the leaves, on the underside of the leaves. You can also just water it like as a soil drench. And that's an easy way, if you're doing a large area or you want to hit all your favorite plants in your yard, the compost teas is another way to really beef it up. The worm bins and compost pile. So it's supercharging your worm bin or your compost pile. I talked about, growing your own plants to make your compost pile bigger. The bigger, the better in a sense, the more diversity of things that you put in it. Maybe you want to put in a little bit of rock dust or kelp meal or whatever else you have laying around, right? Grind up your eggshells and put them in there to make it more minerals in there, remineralize your soil, and also add different nutrients with your variety of organic matter. And then also adding all this stuff to garden beds, your compost, your worm castings, your amendments, mulching like on top. We don't like to mix, fresh mulchy stuff into the soil, but keep that on the top layer or on the pathways. Actually, our exploration gardens, vegetable garden, we usually a straw mulch on the top, and that you can easily scrape away for when you need to till the garden or anything like that.
Is it true that mulch will build some nitrogen when it's really fresh and put it on top of that way, you don't want to mix it in. And
Yeah. Right, so like just any of this fresh organic matter, remember in the soil food web, the first thing to break it down is the bacteria. And the bacteria are kind of like robbing that nitrogen and holding it in their bodies while they're breaking that stuff down. But after it's broken down, like different sets of microbes work in, like the fungi and the other things, and then it kind of releases that again. But to avoid the nitrogen getting tied up, as long as you keep it on the surface of the earth and you're not like mixing in raw organic stuff, you know, deep down, then they'll just be, you know, feeding on the surface of it, and that's fine.
And I would add too, that when you're mulching, especially with wood chips, the only thing that breaks cellulose down, wood, is mycelium. Well, it's not gonna work in the hot sun unless you get moisture on it. So that's why they tell you, but you're gonna do wood chips and you want to, you know, to help make your soil, you need 2 or 3 inches of it, you gotta get it wet. So that underneath that mycelium can have something to live with and get going, start breaking that down, and you can keep adding stuff and it will work its way into your soil. But you got to remember moisture, temperature, what you're putting it on.
Yeah, so just like use it as a mulch and not
And you can
incorporate it.
inoculate it too. You can take some, you can find some stuff with that white mycelium,
You
throw it
can
over
sprinkle
there
on
and
your
cover it
pile.
up. You just inoculated it. You can inoculate your compost bin after you, if you're composting and you're doing the thermic, meaning you get that
Hot.
temperature up to get weed seeds and pathogen, well, you killed everything. So how do I get the biology back in? Well, when it cools back down, you can take a handful of that soil right out of your garden and inoculate. You can take a handful of worm castings and inoculate it. That bacteria will grow and expand. The fungi will grow and expand.
Well, so 2 things would be soil on top, putting some more castings, and then the mulch on top, or on putting like leaf mulch, mycelium and everything, and then the mulch on top of that.
All of it.
All of it.
Yeah, you can mix the worm castings in and then always just the mulch on top.
Diversity, diversity, diversity.
Yeah, and then we have fruit trees. So fruit trees are kind of a high value crop. You know, some fruits are going as much as $5 a piece nowadays. So how do you supercharge your fruit trees? All these methods again: compost, worm composting, add some of these amendments, compost tea, spraying the leaves. We have a ton of UF-IFAS publications on fruit trees. Like you can Google UF-IFAS, like growing banana in the home garden. And some of them have specific recommendations for fertilizer and spray, maybe micronutrient sprays, that it specifically says like spray this on the foliage of the plant so it can better uptake that way. So just depending on what you're growing, you know, check out our IFAS recommendations, and, you know, mulching on top of the fruit trees, spraying them. And like we were talking about, this is kind of a beginner food forest here, because they have all the mulch, but a more advanced food forest, they would be planting, you know, the banana, the nitrogen, the carbon, all in between here. And they wouldn't even need mulch anymore because it would be all a living mulch. And then all those microbes can freely, you know, connect everything all together. And then,
Yeah, I would add that you're looking at all this, and like she was saying, the foliar sprays or maybe the micronutrients. An economical way to get a lot of these things out there is making teas. And you kind of spread it out there and kind of get things going. Instead of just, you can get the raw ingredients and they're fantastic, but it can get expensive. So if you make teas with this, especially with the worm castings, with that biology, you can spray that out. You can really jumpstart your stuff at a much lower cost.
yeah, that's right. And then finally, you know, you can just use this on your lawns, on your palm trees, on your ornamentals, your vegetables, on everything else. So this is all good stuff. It's just a matter of how much love do you want to put into your plant? How much time and money do you want to spend on making it look good? And so, you know, like Mark was saying, the teas are a great way. If you're doing the whole lawn we have in our whole garden here, you might want to make a tea instead of trying to sprinkle compost over that whole area. So that pretty much wraps it up. And if you guys could please take a minute to do our survey, we will take a couple questions and you can come up here and get your free sample. And then I'll be raffling off some of these plants we brought. Here's my information, Tia Silvesi. And also Mark and Christian's email. So let's give everybody a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
I encourage you to come up and look at these things, touch this stuff, smell this stuff. This is all high quality, fresh stuff. There are people that sell stuff and you can just tell if it's sitting around too long. Some of these things will lose their efficacy after a period of time. So if you're gonna spend money on Fertility meal, Neem meal, you want the freshest you can get. Okay.
So how long should we be spraying these teas on plants?
Well, it depends on what kind of tea you're making and what you're spraying.
Right.
We actually make a tea with a lot of the same ingredients we put in the soil, called the feed and protect tea. And once a week, you make the tea, you spray your leaves, bottom
Like
of
a
your
vegetable
soil.
garden.
Once a week with that tea, we put it at a ratio that you can't burn anything. Okay? And if you do that, you start with the healthy soil and you do this, you're basically feeding that soil all the time and protecting the plant so that after 3 months after your tomato's gone, go to the next vegetable.
Yeah.
Okay, you simply add some worm castings and all your nutrient levels are back up. It's been proven with soil testing. So.
And is it necessary to spray or sprinkle the mycorrhizal all over everything?
Well, no, mycorrhizal has to be touching the roots to work.
Right.
So it has to be applied to the roots,
Right.
it's not something you want to spray.
Okay.
It's something you want to apply to the roots of root care. And you don't always have to use it. It can help, but there's different mycorrhizals. So you gotta know what you gotta do a little homework.
Yeah. Do you need to put mycorrhizal if you're doing everything else?
You don't need to. Some people do it. It depends who you're talking to and what they're trying to grow and how into it they want to get into. Okay, because mycorrhizal fungi, depending where you get it, can get expensive. And again, there's different mycorrhizal fungi. You gotta know which ones for which plants. Okay, some have a general, they carry like 15, it kind of covered all the bases. Okay. But again, the teas, that's a tea we make, but there are teas that we have a company called River Brew that uses our castings to make their worm tea. That they don't put any chemicals, it's only good for 6 months. But what they do is they make it, they sterilize, and they reintroduce the good bacteria. But you can use that for feeding, they use that for pest protection. Okay, you can do the same thing. There's all these things can be made, people use insect frass in their teas. Because the plant senses insect poop, and so it automatically kicks its defense in. And so I'm like, oh, there must be a bug on me because I smell the poop. So they put the frass in the tea, so when they spray it on, it kicks the defense of the plant. There's all kinds of crazy teas and formulas, and the science is behind them, and they work. I mean, differences in height like this.
Yeah.
All right, guys, so I'm gonna start the raffle and you guys can come up. All these plants on the table are for grabs. I'm just gonna read the last 3 numbers, 588. And you can come up and get your free samples too. 584. All right, you won. Anything on the plants? I got 590. That's a shampoo ginger. 595. Thank you. 585. Okay, you're taking the Fakahatchee. Which one is it? That's the shampoo ginger. Shampoo ginger.
Interesting.
593. Cardamom. What is this big one? Shampoo? Shampoo ginger. I got 587. 586. That one is the pigeon pea. It's the nitrogen fixing legume.
We do a lot.
Cardamom.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you got the baby banana. All right. Great, thank you.
Yeah, so. They gave it to Live Tea, he's selling. Or you don't touch it.
Oh, man.
You can't.
Yeah, let's.
How long?